What's up, everyone? Welcome to the show. Today it is Physio Monday. We've got our resident physiotherapist, Phil White, here, and we're going to be answering your questions, talking myofascial stretching, if it's even a thing, talking about meniscuses, and a whole bunch of other injuries. So stick around.
Good to be back. It's Monday Morning Tribe. I've got obviously Phil White here. We got Rad across the table and Richie, the voice of God, behind the microphone. We are Unity Gym and the Unified Movement System. Remember, guys, if you're a first timer on the podcast, then make sure you download our blueprints for strength, flexibility, and nutrition. It's really just a collaboration of the biggest lessons we've learnt, experienced as we navigate this thing called the health and fitness industry. How is everyone today?
Good. Just on the blueprints, I always put the links to the blueprints in the podcast kind of distribution service, but I do know that in most of the kind of platforms you use, the links show up, and then in some it just comes up as plain text, and so you can't actually get them. So depending on if you can't click the link, make sure you do find them in another way. So what's the best way to find them?
Website.
Just go to
unitygym.com and scroll down on the home page. You'll get about halfway down and you'll see a link for all three of the blueprints. Grab them there.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect.
Does everyone else have subtitles coming up in the screen, or is that just
Subtitles, really? Ooh. Nope, that's...
Subtitles for talking, us talking.
Yeah.
No, the future is now, though. Look at that.
Wow.
Don't know what's going on there.
Are they accurate?
I'm not going to read them. It's going to distract me.
That could be very distracting. But yeah, happy to be doing another Physio Monday. It's been, I think we've had 2 weeks where other things have come up. Like we had that excellent interview with Tom DeCanto, the elite runner, talking all things getting into running. So that was great. And we also had another week where it was waylaid. So we have a bit of a back catalogue of questions to get through. So make sure if you are listening live that you get your questions in early. But otherwise, we're going to have a... talk through Paul Cowan's question, Dylan, Becca Perry's, Clay Brenda, and Sam Dyer's question. So we've got a few in the pipeline here ready to go. But yeah, if you do.
And Yanni, if you click on the settings wheel in the bottom right and then turn off auto-generated captions, that'll fix it for you.
Oh, there you go.
I can't believe that. Like, you think of how fast technology is evolving, and there's so much new stuff that comes out every year that so many of the inventions just get lost. Can you believe that we're living in a day and age where the technology just can pick up your voice and immediately generate captions for us?
Crazy.
Like, it was only a few years ago that you used to have to pay people to dictate for you, you know? Like you used to have to pay a human being to do it.
Mental.
The future is now.
100%. I actually, on that topic, had an email from a gentleman who had bought one of our 18-minute stretching routine, who is deaf, and was asking if we provide the programs with captions. We don't just yet, because it's still extremely expensive to do so. To do a full program like that would cost a lot of money. So until it's doing it automatically like this, then unfortunately, we just have to.
Well, sorry about that, guys.
What we can do, Anyway, let's dive
let's get into it. So
question.
the first question I'm going to get to is Dylan Hofstetler, who asked a question a little while ago about a wrist injury that he had in 2010 or 2011. And he says it kind of hurts time to time and is assuming that it may be getting sprained. So I think this one's a really good one to talk about because wrists are a really common thing for people in the UMS, especially if you haven't done any kind of calisthenics body weight pen before. Yanni, you've got something to say?
I do. Very importantly, before we get started, I just want to say, if you're wondering, if you're listening to the podcast or if you are watching the replay on YouTube, if you're wondering where we're getting these questions from, these are coming through in our UMS Movement Mastermind private Facebook group. If you haven't already, jump over there and apply to join the group. It's free. Everyone's welcome. You just have to agree to abide by the code of conduct.
And it's actually not a private Facebook group. It's actually a public Facebook group.
Oh, really? Is it?
Yes. The UMS online coaching group and the Unity Gym Tribe are private Facebook groups, but this is a public one.
Yep, and when you are in there, make sure when you do have questions around injuries that you do tag me in it. So that's Phil White. That makes it much easier to find them later. So yeah, this wrist question is really great because we get it all the time, and it's something that's kind of led to wrist prep being inbuilt as part of the UMS program, because the wrists are often going to be the weakest chain link in the chain, and will often be the thing that limits your progression forward. So getting your wrist right and taking the time to condition your wrist to calisthenics when you're starting out, and just general gym training is so important. So what he said is so I had that injury potentially 9 or 10 years ago. Not even sure if it would be necessary, but the pain is near the thumb. What should I do to prevent pain in the future? Would strengthening my forearms and grip help, along with working on flexibility and mobility? Thanks in advance. So with the pain being around your thumb, it's an even more common thing in today's society, with the amount of time we spend using our thumbs on the phones. Then maybe if you're play some computer games as well with the joystick, it's just a really tough thing for thumbs that
gamers, mate.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a tough gig.
But like texting thumb is no joke. Like it's a real thing that people are
really
getting quite crippled by.
It's so funny, isn't it? Sign of the times again, huh?
Yeah, but it's totally understandable. We have these crazy
magical
magical rectangles in our pocket where we can access anyone and any bit of information in the world. So I can it's understandable that we do get it. But yeah, with thumb pain, if it is in the thumb joint itself, then that could be just kind of a pain from using your thumb with texting. But if it is kind of more up into the wrist, and it's a same wrist pain you sort of had since 2010 and 2011, which may have come around from landing with your arm outstretched, which is what my kind of wrist pain came from. Around just near your thumb is a bone called your scaphoid, and often when you fall with your arm outstretched and brace yourself, you can do some scaphoid damage. And so the scaphoid's a tricky muscle because it has very little blood supply, and so they're really careful when they're scanning it to make sure that it's basically if you injure it really badly and you don't get it dealt with, it can actually die. It's I think that was one of the questions that came up in the online coaching or UMS mastermind. The guy who had the surgery to sort of, it replaced his scaphoid almost. But I'm not saying this happened to you, Dylan, but it's one of those it's a really tricky bone, and when I did the injury, it didn't the bone didn't die itself, but it has messed with me for years and years afterwards, and it's really limited my extension.
So when you say mess with you, is it just that the bone is inflamed, it sends a pain signal, or?
Yeah, it seems to be kind of it's just sort of shift with the bone, with the hands. I think it's 28 different bones in your hand and wrist, so there's just a lot of stuff going on in there that has to kind of all work together nicely. And when you've had a traumatic injury, sometimes things can just get a bit out of whack and heal in a certain way that just never get quite right. And so I've had a recurring ganglion, which is kind of a thickening of the tendon spot just through my wrist. After that, ever since then, my wrist has just never been quite the same. So it really limits me with doing sort of handstand work, because no matter how much sort of wrist prep I get, I just can't get into loaded extension without really flaring up my wrists.
Yep.
I haven't taken it to the extreme of rehabbing this stuff because my goals are not around calisthenics, so I haven't waylaid all of my other training to focus on this entirely. But it's a really tricky thing, and so I get around it because my goals aren't necessarily on calisthenics. Is if I want to do any training like that, then I'll use push-ups on my fists, or using stall bars, or small hex dumbbells to be my point of contact. So that way, instead of being in an extended weight-bearing position with your wrist, you can be in a neutral weight-bearing. That's often a whole lot more comfortable for people with wrist pain.
Yep.
Your questions about what you were suggesting, maybe strengthening the forearm and grip, is 100% spot on. So again, whenever you have a joint, if you think about what is involved in the joint, you've got lots and lots of bones, some cartilage and some ligaments, and then the things that can actually control that joint is the muscles. So if you can be strengthening the muscles of your forearm, they actually do cross your wrist and into your hand, and they'll provide really good active stability. Now, when it comes to flexibility and mobility, that's where it can get a bit tricky, because with flexibility and mobility, often you're pushing past the end-to-end ranges where now your passive structures, so your ligaments, your cartilage and your bones, become the limiting factor. And that is good if it's not aggravating, but if you kind of push it too hard, that can really flare things up. So with all this sort of stuff, it's all about gradual exposure, and find that kind of point that you can manage what you want to do. While
I've found the best way to develop flexibility and mobility in the wrist by a country mile is through the strengthening exercises that we do anyway. One of the things that I did for a decade in my earlier years when I really didn't know anything about what I know now, but in Kung Fu you have to do these positions with your hands, and that was something that I had to work on heaps. Like, most people really struggle to be able to pull their hand into extension like that, but by doing these isometric holds where you're actively pulling back and trying to straighten your elbows, the way that gave me exposure to that end range with no impact, no external pressure on it. That worked for me to create a little bit of earlier on stages of strength, and then going into what we do, where you do all the strengthening movements. I found created really good mobility.
Look, it's not just us. We've all found that, and still one of the most highest watched videos, which is the bane of my existence because it's very outdated content, is the original golfer's elbow video that we created on the fly many years ago, which was really just using our wrist routine and then showing people how to progress into heavy lifting, things like deadlifts, rowing, pulling exercise patterns, chin-ups, things like that, as a progressive overload mechanism. And it still shocks me at how many comments we get. I'm talking thousands of comments of people saying this routine has changed my life. And it's not a golfer's elbow routine, really. Like it's not a tendinopathy. There wasn't a lot of science that went into it. It was just like, this worked for us. Try it, see how you go, and people find that it works. And it's really just because it's just loading the joints and slowly building up the range of movement that you're loading them in, and as long as you do that in a progressive way, it usually works quite well. For the layman though, most people don't understand how to strengthen a joint, like understand the concepts of, like for the wrist, like which movements you do need to do to actually strengthen it. I mean, even as a personal trainer, it took me years, maybe not decades, but a decade to learn the kind of stuff that we now put into our program and take for granted that we know. So if you're just somebody that's trolling the internet, I can really understand that if you came across our routines that we teach, that would seem like a revelation to you, because it probably is for a lot of people. Probably is a revelation.
For sure. So Dylan, my recommendation would be start doing the wrist prep, and this is one of those things where, because it's fairly low level, you can do it every day for a while, just really try and slowly bring things up, and then consider maybe doing like a heavier wrist prep, like wrist strengthening work, like the forearm program these guys have put together on your upper body days, so Mondays and Thursdays if you're following what we do in the gym, and so you're doing like the general exposure conditioning every day, but then targeted strengthening twice a week. And then if it's kind of getting to the point where, like, no matter how like gradually you try and bring things up and it's still painful, have a go at like using the stall bars or hex dumbbells or something on the floor where you can be in that strong neutral position, and see how you go with like building up strength in that very neutral range, and then and then build out from there. And if you can't get past it, then maybe reassess, like if your goals are doing like back bridges, then maybe that's just not going to be a great option for you, but definitely keep doing your upper body training, definitely keep like pursuing calisthenics, but just do it with a different grip. It's fine. Yep. Don't be a movement purist about it. Just
that's right.
Keep training.
You've got to at some point you've got to take into consideration the history that your body has. And a lot of us, I like to always say never give up on a good thing, but you got to learn to be able to work around it, and learn to be able to identify and understand what might be a limitation for you. And we're blessed with being able to bounce ideas off each other when we're training here, so it's nice to surround yourself with a good circle of influence. And one thing I will say, with the wrist prep stuff that we do here in the program, I slacked off it this year. It's one of the many things that I sort of allowed to, become a shelved priority. And I've recently started doing a little bit of boxing again, and hitting the bag. My wrists were really weak. They weren't used to the weight that I've got behind my body now and the strength, and I hurt my wrist quite quickly. And I've reintroduced the wrist prep stuff again, and they're coming good really quickly again. It's just surprising how quickly you lose it when you don't use it. You know?
Yeah. So just one kind of point that I always have to say on these shows is just remember this is his general kind of advice around injuries and what kind of questions you should be asking the people you're working with professionally. And again, with things that have been hanging around for 10 years, I imagine you would have had it looked at by now. But if you haven't, it could be worth having things looked at by a professional, and and just hopefully this will kind of give you a good framework to think about it.
I'm a part of, and I want to say this because it's on wrists, and I was just really quite concerned with a lot of the feedback and suggestions that were made. But I was in a post caught my eye in the Muscle Intelligence group in Ben's group I'm part of, and someone said, "Okay, friends, how do I deal with golfer's elbow? I've had it for a month now, and it's just getting worse." And any advice would be appreciated. And I haven't seen Ben comment yet. It came in over the weekend, but some of the comments in there were clearly indicated that there is a lot of misunderstanding about how to treat injuries. From people saying eat more sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes have an anti-inflammatory.
Sick.
Not
an inflammatory condition.
Well, this is what I was saying, and the comment that got the most praise that was spot on was from someone calling themselves a physiotherapist, saying if it's only been around for a month, a cortisone injection, anti-inflammatories, and rest until the pain subsides. And I was like, that is as far from the best strategy possible. And that was from the physiotherapist, and it had 80 likes. Geez. I was like, whoa, these guys have no clue what they're doing. So it is clear, you got to surround yourself with the right people. Ask the right people.
Yep. And do see a professional. And I do recommend, if you do have hand or wrist things or foot things, see hand therapists or or podiatrists, because you want to work with people who really know that area.
What they're doing. Yep.
But we must charge on. We have plenty of questions to get through. Sam
Dyer.
Yeah, we'll get to Paul Cowan just quickly. And he says, I have started the knee rehab program. I damaged my meniscus about 10 months ago and had another operation for a previous tear about 15 years ago. I find the exercise on phase 1 pretty easy, except for the low side step up, where the knee can almost give way at quite a low weight. It also makes a clicking noise as I raise up and down. I don't feel any other exercise are giving me that much trouble. Could I incorporate different exercises like the low side step up? And so, hang on, you've actually answered.
I asked him if he knows, if there's any more info he can give us on the type of tear, because meniscus tear, there's a lot of different ones, and you almost have to approach them a little bit differently. If you've got a really bad flap tear, then honestly, I don't recommend bending your knee past 90 degrees, because there's so much chance that you can aggravate it, and you can still do so much with a 90-degree knee flexion. There are times when I would say, okay, you're not trying to get your knee into full flexion anymore. You're just trying to build strength in the global muscles and keep it moving a little bit, Yeah,
100%. So with meniscus injuries, so for people who don't know what a meniscus is, it's the cartilage in between your knee. So it kind of acts as a bit of a shock absorber and helps kind of the shape and size of the point of contact between the bones and the joint. It's one that really freaks people out because it has a bit of a fancy name, and then when people hear they have meniscus damage, it sounds like the end of the world. But really, it's just one kind of part of the overall knee system, and when you see scans of knees and there's a closing down of the joint space, it's been pretty amazing to see the research into this in the last 5 years has really showed that the amount of meniscus sort of damage over time doesn't really correlate with pain or function at all. So just because if there is some damage there, don't freak out. The one time when it is a really good idea to get an operation is when you get something like a flap tear, where you actually get locking of the knee, which is basically when you try and bend your knee, it kind of gets stuck in a point where, as the name suggests, the flap kind of gets stuck and closes down space. But with...
Which you usually know about because it's generally very painful.
Yeah, exactly right. And so with... I really like what you said there about... strengthening within your available range is a great idea, because especially in this group, and I know Rad loves an Osteogras squat and encourages everyone to do it because it's a great way of expressing strength through a full range of motion. But there are certain times where, you've got to try and put your movement purist hat aside and take on the building up. Keeping involved in an exercise that's going to be helpful for you. So it's something that I have. I've got almost certainly got a meniscus injury that I just have never got scanned because I know that won't really change what I'm doing. But basically, I'm squatting to 90 degrees now, and I'm able to, kind of be fine with that. And I'm able to build up strength, squat over 100 kilos, and play beach volleyball, and everything's fine. But it just means that like certain positions like that flexion, end range flexion, really are aggravating. And so the low side step up, so that's the on the step and just doing the...
So you usually start at a 6-inch height and then you slowly work up from there. But there's times like Tony Battaggi used to boast that he had rehabbed a professional downhill skier. One of his clients was a gold medalist downhill skier who blew both her knees out in competition really badly. Like it was like a double knee dislocation. It was horrible, big damage to the meniscus. And he got her fully functioning and competing again over the period of about 6 to 12 months. And he said she was in such bad shape that they started doing step-ups, knee activation step-ups on a 20-kilo weight plate on the floor. Like it was literally 2 inches off the height, and then slowly progressed her to higher, slowly got her bending the knee more, but she never squat past 90-degree knee flexion after that point. And she didn't need to for her sport because she was a downhill skier. It's not essential to be hitting that depth. It's good if you can do it 100% because then you're ready for it if you go there skiing. But he said with the right progressive overload, using step-ups and really shelving the ego, you can build phenomenal strength back into the legs.
And why side step-ups are so good is it really tackles the hip complex as well. So the knee is, you got to remember, a complex hinge joint in between what's happening at your feet and what's happening at your hips. So the amount of strength and stability you have at your ankles and the amount of strength and stability you have at your hips is going to massively impact what's happening at your knee. Because you can imagine if you've got kind of two moving points at the top and the bottom, whenever you take a step or whenever you try and squat, if your ankles and knee are ankles and hips are got a lot of excess movement, then your knee is going to be having to basically deal with that in the middle, and that is not a happy place for the passive structures that are trying to cushion that end range movement. But if you have really strong hips and really strong ankles that are also very stable, it means that your knee now has to do very little in the way of stability, and now can just hinge appropriately. So the side step ups are really good. If it is kind of a bit weak for you at the moment, it's probably a good sign that that's what you need to do even more of, but just take a real progressive overload approach.
Now, hang on, can I throw something in here? So I want to talk just quickly about what Phil just said there about the ankle and the hip playing such a critical role in the knee. I have successfully rehabilitated a flap tear on my meniscus. I had what's called a non-displaced flap tear, which means there was a flap tear, but it hadn't displaced, so it hadn't pulled out to the side, like what Phil said, so it wasn't causing
or
me...
Or just flat back on itself, which is what commonly happens.
So it was sitting in the place that it should sit, but it was torn. And it caused me a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. And my legs are, by a country mile, the most capable part of my body. I'm flexible, strong, and capable of quite great feats of strength. But what I did, the rehab approach, which was I had to work with Leroy because you were doing your placement back then, so I didn't have access to Phil, but I worked with Leroy, who's an amazing physiotherapist, and he got me not bending past 120 degrees of knee flexion to start with, and then I gradually increased from there, and he explained to me why. And it was around what you said. He said, look, you've got to understand the role that the ankle and the hip plays. And he said, yeah, you can go past that, but you might not be doing it in a way that is really developing optimal movement patterns, and it's training the muscles on how to work properly. So you might be feeling like, oh, these exercises aren't challenging me, but I'm looking at the program right now at what you've got here, and you've got low side step-ups, lying hamstring activation, standing straight knee calf raises, seated calf raise, quarter range box goblet squats, which I can understand might seem like nothing to you, and then the single leg balance drill. Now, all of those exercises are designed to be very, very low risk to give you muscle activation, because it's called the muscle activation phase. So if you feel like you don't get much from it, do it for only 2 to 3 weeks. Some people only need to be in a muscle activation phase for a couple of weeks and then move on to phase 2, where we go from quarter range goblet squats to half range goblet squats into split squats and a bunch of other things. So don't get caught up in the, should I not do these exercises? Just do them for a short period of time and then progress.
And use movement quality as the kind of sign of whether you can progress. Like if you're doing it straight off the bat, really well controlled, and if you're not sure, post videos and we can help you out. Then move on. But if you are just like, oh, this feels easy and light, but then meanwhile the
movement quality is bad, and that's what I was going to finish off with saying is I think where a lot of people go wrong with rehabilitation or regression, as Phil likes to call it, is that they don't understand the importance of developing good quality movement patterns. And when you have a traumatic injury, your body creates suboptimal movement patterns to protect that joint quite often, and that's what you're working around. You're working to recreate the good movement patterns so that you move forward without putting excessive strain on the joint.
There's 2 things that I want to dial really deep on this, because I think there's a lot of value we can give everyone here. First and foremost, I want to address the fact that this is not the first time something's happened to Paul's knee. He's even saying in the comment here, 10 months ago I had an operation for a previous tear about 15 years ago. There is something going on here where there's obviously a lot of room for strength development and better movement pattern development. Otherwise the knees, unless you're just absolutely careless with your body, which I seriously doubt, there's dysfunction occurring here. And I would just embrace the process, brother. Like, I know it's hard. We're used to smashing ourselves. We're used to training at a high intensity, but there are times when you need to just scale it back and embrace the process and go, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to let the thing play out properly, and I'm not going to rush it, because based on what you're saying here in your comment, there's a lot that we can read into here, but it just comes across to me like you're the type of guy that doesn't like to slow down and give yourself a little bit.
He said that later on, but also, he said, he's done a classic sort of, had an MRI scan and talked through all the different things, which are the tricompartmental arthritic changes, lateral full thickness, articular deficits, and subchondral changes, and Baker's cysts and meniscal tears. Like, all those things sound really scary and full on, but what it means is basically you have a dysfunctional system in your knee, and all of those things that you're talking about there are all the passive structures that have to take up the slack when your active structures aren't supporting well. So
nine times out of 10, a Baker's cyst indicates that the hamstrings are just not doing their job properly and they're super weak. There's like so much here that's just exactly what you've just said.
It sounds all very scary and very specific, but what it actually means is that your passive structures are getting overloaded because your active structures aren't supporting well, and the system isn't working well. And you got to remember the system for the knee is the hip and the ankle as well. So if you're having a lot of struggle on this hip kind of dominant exercise, then I'd really double down on that movement training and then start building up strength 100%. Through there. So.
Now, the final thing I want to address here is that Paul and anyone else who's listening, if I read you the report of my knee, it would sound 3 times as bad as this. I still have a Baker's cyst the size of a golf ball in the back of my right knee after having my knee reconstruction. It 100% does not mean that your knee is stuffed. I don't even think about my knee anymore. I went for a walk on the weekend and carried my son on my shoulders for about 6 kilometres across the Harbour Bridge on Sunday morning, and I felt my knee a little bit and I felt my hip a little bit, and I was like, oh, geez, we might want to turn back because this, I might struggle a little bit after a while. And that's just because I slowly build up. But when I'm training and when I'm going for a run and things like that, it's a slight limitation for me, but it doesn't stop me. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. I just make sure that I'm programming to
squat at 180 kilos.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So
ask us.
I want you to just make sure that we remind everyone that when you go and get an MRI, although it's a very important tool that we use in diagnosis, you are not your scan. You are not your MRI. It often doesn't indicate that you should be feeling a certain way or anything. Everyone, if they go get a scan, they're going to find some sort of degeneration, bone degeneration, arthritis, all sorts of stuff. So just remember that. To give you some context, last year or the year before, I think at the last Olympics, they did a little study where they scanned the spines of quite a lot of athletes. I think it was like 1,000 athletes or something like that, and professional athletes that are training at the highest level and making it to the Olympics and Commonwealth Games. Every one of them had some form of bone and joint degeneration in the spine that most people would find really alarming, and these guys are the best athletes in the world. So
yep, morphological changes do not predict pain and function. So
there you go.
So we're out of time. Have we got time for one more?
Quickly? Yeah, Sam Dyer, I'd like to get to briefly. So she's saying, help with the trapped nerve, ! Question mark. I have tendinopathy in my foot due to a break and sprain several years ago. I'm following the advice of the rehab podcast and slowly build out the strength. Good on ya. Today I started the Cash to 5K course, but in about 3/4 in a nerve in the bottom of my foot, got stuck and it hurt a lot. This has happened to me before just from walking. What can I do to prevent such? Fix this. The run did hurt my tendinopathy, but I'll see how it feels tomorrow. Do I need to take it even slower for the tendons and nerves to get better? All right, Sam. I would love to know how you know this is a trapped nerve, because this is a thing that people like to say a lot, and it's just a bit of a misnomer most of the time. So basically, it's very unusual for nerves to get trapped in one place. What happens usually is that nerves can get sensitized, and that you get nervy sort of responses from movements that are usually not painful. But the idea of a trapped nerve is, again, that use of language that really puts the wrong idea in people's heads and changes how they act and feel about their body. So I don't love that term. So you've said you've got tendinopathy here as well, which I love that you've been following along the podcast, and it seems like you're taking a good gradual approach to exercise. But again, with tendinopathy, as we talked about the other day, sometimes people think that just because it's not a non-traumatic injury, that therefore it's a tendinopathy, and again, that's not always the case. So do make sure that you are working with someone to clearly diagnose the tendinopathy and also this foot pain, and also if you do have nervy symptoms, that's a definite sign that it's a good idea to see a professional about it. So with nerve symptoms, that's generally if you get tingling, numbness, or weakness, so with numbness, like loss of sensation, and weakness, which in the foot might present itself as like a drop foot, where you're clipping your toes more than usual. You're kind of tripping over a little bit here and there. So if you do have any of those nervy symptoms, do make sure you do see someone. It's very common in people who've also got diabetes, because of the way that nerves can be damaged by type 2 diabetes. So I'm not going to go too far into the whole trapped nerve thing, because that's a whole nother couple of hours of podcast to talk about. But I do recommend, if you do have things that you think are nervy, go see a good podiatrist about it, someone who uses their feet, someone who runs, not someone who's just going to put you straight in orthotics. Yep. But I do love that you're taking the approach of the Couch to 5K, and generally, if things are still getting aggravated, then reintroducing things maybe even slower is a good idea. But if you're not doing any foot strengthening for this tendinopathy, if it is a tendinopathy, make sure you're also doing a strengthening approach, because remember, tendinopathy is all about building up the capacity through strength and reintroduction of activities.
Yep.
There's been a question. There's been a comment here about rolling your feet with a lacrosse ball. Again, fine for short-term pain management. Does zero for building up capacity with tendinopathies and plantar heel pain.
Yeah. So I'm just reading further into this. Blakely's asked what your feet look like, and she's answered, "I didn't have any problems until I broke my heel a few years ago," and it sounds like there seems like a lot going on in this foot, and it seems like maybe, there's just a lot that hasn't really been dealt with well after a traumatic injury a while ago, which can change the way you load bear, and it just changes so much. And I personally think I reckon you need to go and work on building some strength in the global muscles, in the ankle, in the calves, in the quads, in the hamstrings, in the glutes. I think maybe that's something. Yeah,
and with when you think about a traumatic injury like a broken heel, like that could be a sign of a structural change that does impact the thing long term. But what it usually means, more so, like the body's pretty good at healing. What it usually is that you then suddenly stop using the the muscles around the foot, and therefore they become a whole lot weaker. And then, just like we've talked about before, with like when you have a reduction in capacity and then an abusive load, then a tendinopathy comes on. So, or you try and reintroduce activities a bit too quick, and then you can start getting weird aches and pains. So I like that you have definitely taken a good little progressive approach. But again, if you have nerve pain, see someone about it.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, look, it's shocking how quickly you lose muscle strength when you injure yourself to such a degree that you can no longer load that area of the body. The moment you remove just the daily load of getting up and moving around, and I saw this firsthand, within 5 days I lost a staggering amount of muscle in my quadriceps and leg when I was all bandaged up after the knee reconstruction. And I was just sitting there watching the muscle disappear, like the body just sort of goes, oh, well, I don't need this anymore. And so
with atrophy, the muscle cells don't actually go away. What they do is shrink.
Yeah,
and so they're still there, and that's why when you do get back training, they bounce back real quick. But obviously, the longer you leave it, then they actually do start to break down the cells themselves.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what I want to just quickly address. If you've injured yourself to a degree where you've broken your heel, the bone, and you've had to take time off to heal that bone, breaks are usually the slowest to recover, and you haven't gone and done some intentional strength training work to bring that leg, foot, everything back up to its desired level, then that needs to be prioritized now before you start a running program. That's my feedback.
Yep, love it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. For the people who are on the live stream, you're sitting there, you're not asking any questions. Get on it, guys. It doesn't have to be like an injury that you've had. It could be any, any kind of principle around rehab or anything you want.
Now, very quickly, for anyone who's jumped on the UMS online coaching flash sale, 14-day free trial, we will get you all into the private Facebook group today. I had a lot of requests over the weekend. Please understand, we do close down over the weekend like most businesses. We don't run 24/7, 365 days a year because we all have families and that sort of thing. But we'll get you in there because as of tomorrow, we're going to be doing a live stream every day to get you guys up to speed with where you need to be focusing your attention. So we'll be doing this stream for only half an hour from 8:45 until 9:15.
Which is what we usually aim for. But yeah.
And then we'll be going live into the private Facebook group for the UMS online coaching. So make sure you have requested to join that group, and we'll get you all set up, ready to go, and crushing it with that new UMS online coaching program. Welcome to everyone who's now part of that coaching group. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Take care.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.